Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting comics loving, comic strip loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, delighted to be talking with the creator of the comic strip Speed Bump, and that is Dave Coverly. Dave, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for the invite. This is so fun.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. Glad to have you and glad to be in touch. As I mentioned, folks out there will know you for Speed Bump, and I am, of course, curious about how you got connected and enmeshed in this world of comics and very speedy storytelling as well.
Yeah, I think enmeshed is a great way to put it. It's not something that you sort of you don't go through life and like say, oh, I'll check this box and this box, and I think, oh, I think I'll do that. It's
Mhm.
like cartooning and anything creative is usually something that sort of comes out of you naturally. And so, like all kids, I did a lot of drawing and I would write my own stories and illustrate them. And, like things like when I read The Hobbit, I'm like, oh, I want to write something like that and illustrate something like that. And oh my gosh, I just killed it. And then, as you get older, it gets harder. Like you get better, but not as good as you want to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I always tell the story, but like when you're 5 and you draw a giraffe, you're like, oh my God, I drew a giraffe. This is an awesome giraffe. And then when you're 11 and you draw a giraffe, you're like, this giraffe sucks.
Right.
I could draw better. And so there's just there are a few of us who plow through that sort of briny area to get from one part of the water to the other part of the water. And I got through it in part because I loved not just the drawing. Like I really people think about cartooning, I think they immediately think about the art.
Mhm.
But to me, I think 90% of cartooning is about the idea. And
Yeah.
if you don't have a good idea, then the drawing is not going to save it. So I always like daydreaming. I always just like putting things together. And when you're thinking of ideas, it's kind of like you're making up a puzzle in your mind. This is your own little puzzle to solve, and then you draw the answer for everybody. And so I feel like as a kid, I even enjoyed doing that. So it wasn't something that I chose. It was just something that I just enjoyed and followed. Of course, uh, doing cartoons and being a professional cartoonist is not something that you just go to school for exactly. Like there's
Mhm.
not a master's in syndicated cartooning. And so finding your path is a completely different thing than enjoying drawing. I mean, that's just the business side of it gets tricky. So my path was more when as I got older, I had teachers and my parents were fantastic. They were very encouraging. In hindsight, they told me they were worried like later, but they were always said the nice things and said go for it if you want to do it. But really, it was teachers, man. Like if you get a good teacher, it doesn't have to be an art teacher. It can be any teacher, just
Mhm.
any adult who is a role model for you and says like, oh, I think you're doing a good job at this. Um, I think you should pursue it. So I had somebody in fifth grade, a teacher, Bobby Lamb, who just encouraged the heck out of me with my drawings. And I had a high school teacher in journalism. So I was the editor of the high school paper and did the political cartoons for the paper. And this guy, Kenny Zellis, he would bring in New Yorkers for me. So he saw something in me that was a little more advanced than I even saw because when he brought the New Yorkers in and I was, 17, I'm like, I don't even know what the hell's going on in like 70% of these. Like,
Right.
I mean, sometimes I still don't. Um, but that's what people say about my stuff too. Is like, you're trying to make something about something. And so he would bring those in. I just fell in love. That was sort of the moment that I thought, not only do I love these single panel cartoons that are really sort of subtle and um, what they did was they made it a two-way road. And so those cartoons assumed that the reader knew something and the reader brought something to the conversation because that's what
Mhm.
cartoons do is they connect two different people and hopefully in the middle is an idea that one has had and one hasn't had and recognizes as an idea and then you both of you have something and so I really wanted to do that and and sort of in to give myself a little bit of credit as a teenager like I actually kind of like when I read those, even if I didn't get the joke, how they made them made sense to me. Like
Mhm.
that's how
Mhm.
my brain kind of worked that way. Like oh, I get the absurd part and I get how there's like a real setting, but then this part couldn't actually happen. But whatever. Because my brain doesn't work in a comic strip way. Like if I tried to do comic strips for a long time and they all just sucked. I mean, I just don't think that way, character design or whatever. And having a joke based on personality. So for me, long answer to your question is that um, I just loved it so much, and I think I understood it a little bit, and so I just pursued it until it happened. And I didn't get syndicated until I was 30. So there was a lot of pursuing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the persistence paid off certainly, and I'm appreciating what you're saying there about teachers being a teacher, of course.
Mhm.
And so you've gone from uh, this being the direction, the drive, the desire to having made this mark. So what's it like to be on this side of the perseverance and to be creating?
Yeah, that's it's a great question because it's really you don't really know what kind of mark you're making. I mean, you get feedback, but we most of us sort of work alone. I'm here in an attic studio where I work alone every day, and so the feedback you get might be emails and such,
Hmm.
the occasional old-fashioned letter, but really, you're just kind of doing these, putting them out in the world and hoping for the best. And so I would say like I never really thought about making a mark. Like I still think about like, man, I got to do 7 a week. Like I wake
Right.
up on Monday, I've got 0 ideas, and on Wednesday night I got to have 7 drawn. And so that's my life, and I don't think about it in terms of legacy. But this is the 30th year of Speed Bump, and so I have been a tiny bit reflective on just how freaking old I am. Just like because one day you look over and you're like have like 11,000 cartoons in your closet, and you're like, oh my God, that's all I've done for 30 years. I need a hobby. Um, and so I have sort of thought about I'm really happy with the longevity. Like I can't speak to how good my work is or what anything like that, or if it's influenced people, or I mean I've mentored some people, but really it's just you're doing it every day in a way that makes you happy. So when I draw a cartoon, I'm trying to make myself laugh first
Hmm.
because yeah, I mean that's just what you wake up and do because you can't it's impossible to sort of make everybody happy. And I remember I had the cartoonist Mike Peters when I first got syndicated. He gave me a call and he's like, that was the best advice I had gotten back then was just stop thinking about like, oh, I got to do a cartoon that's about this because these people would like it, or
Hmm.
about this because those people would like it. Like you're just never gonna make everybody happy. And and sometimes I'll do a cartoon, I'm like, oh, that one really turned out great. Like I'm really happy with it. I broke new ground, and then I'll send it out, my little baby out in the world, and just be crickets. Like, and and then I'll do one I think is like, I mean, that's is competent, and then I get a bunch of emails. And
Yeah.
so it's like you just never know. In fact, the best example is one of the cartoons I did, which I can send you. It was I've got the most I've sold the most prints of that cartoon more than any of my cartoons combined, and I've gotten the most emails about that cartoon asking me to explain it. And
Huh.
so it really like that one really is sort of telling as far as how subjective all of this is. So I'm still I have to say like I just love it. Like I still love it. 30 years into it, I wake up on Monday and it's like daunting because it's a deadline. But you have muscle memory and you've done it for a long time, and you know the ideas will come. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of actually sitting down and doing it. Not thinking about dinner or reading a different book, or I mean, like you just sit down and you have to do it. You have to do the work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, talking about the connection piece there of creating something from one person to another, just kind of interesting to think about one cartoon and how someone might say, "Well, explain that to me," and someone might
Mhm.
say, "That is the best thing I've ever seen." That's kind of the magic of creation. It sounds like too.
Yeah, it is. It is the magic of it when it really works, and I really understand when it doesn't, because everybody you're showing these to in the paper, the people that I've never met, they're reading these like I have no idea what their life experiences are, and so I'm just trying to find things that a lot of people have in common.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to find, and it's like, because I think sometimes with single panels, we get a little bit of blowback because occasionally we deal in, or not, probably more than occasionally, we deal like in idioms and cliches and things like that. But part of the reason for that is because it's a shortcut. I mean,
Hmm.
the desert island cartoon, I don't really do much of those, but there's a reason that people do them is because like you don't have to explain the situation.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
you just cut right to the joke. And you know, on average, people read a single panel cartoon for like 6 seconds.
Oh,
And so
wow.
if you have to, if you look at a single panel and it's like, well, where is he? What's going on? You know, and then by the time you get to the joke, you're like, okay, yeah. But then the moment's gone. You've kind of
Right.
lost. So humor is comes out of surprise, and if you blow the surprise, if you see somebody's head peeking out from behind the couch at a surprise party, like
Hmm.
it's not a surprise anymore. So it's really kind of a fine balance between trying to be relevant and come up with new sort of topical things to talk and write about, but also talk to people on a level where they're already at the same spot you are. You know,
Yeah.
you're not reinventing the wheel every single time you do a single panel. Um, but that's the tricky part about doing it, and that's sort of trial and error stuff too, because then you'll send one out into the world and people will say that like it's too nichey. Like you couldn't make a whole bunch of cartoons about like the pistons in your engine because nobody
Hmm.
knows what they do except for people who work on engines.
Right.
I certainly don't know. I mean, I think they go up and down or something. But nobody, you know, you'd make 20 people laugh and you'd make, you know, a million people just scratch their heads or stop reading. Um,
Right.
so you gotta, you know, we're all kind of tilling this common ground. So that's the that's the fun part too, though.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned 30 years of sharing ideas this way. Anything that you'd like to say about that initial spark, the kind of the origin of Speed Bump and how it came to be?
Yeah, it was kind of a didn't sort of just burst out. It was one of those long play kind of things. Because I tried to get syndicated for. I mean, I'll back up. I was doing single panel cartoons for my college paper. I went
Hmm.
to I
Hmm.
went to Eastern Michigan and then I went to Indiana University for my master's. So I was already doing them, and I knew that's what I loved doing. And so I would send my stuff out to the syndicates. And at that time, you know, Larson was big and everything. And so I got a lot of good feedback. And one in particular, Jay Kennedy at King Features. I worked with him a lot back in those early days. And so he was saying, you know, we can't really sell a single panel. We can't really sell a single panel to try a comic strip. And that's when I tried doing 3 or 4 comic strips that all, you know, I wouldn't even put them out as a welcome mat. And then uh I just thought, you know, I gotta do what I like. Like I have to follow my talent, like what it is. I can't force it. So for 8 years, from the age of like 22 to the age of 30, every 6 months I'd send out a big submission to all the syndicate, like 5 syndicates. And
Hmm.
so I ended up with, I don't know, probably 40, 50 rejection letters,
Oh,
you know, and
wow.
I saved all of them and I taped them on the wall above my drawing table. And, you know, as the collection grew, my sort of, it didn't dissuade me. It just pissed me off
Yeah.
because I thought like, I really want to do this. And then one day, I got a little lucky. The Creator Syndicate was looking for a single panel, and they were kind of a newish syndicate at the time, and they were kind of getting into the game with single panels, and they needed one. Um, and I had won a contest. There's used to be this magazine in Boston. I won their contest, and they didn't, have a prize except there's a special showing of the syndicates. And so they sent my cartoons to creators, and the creators was like, "Oh, we really like these." And in the interim, the magazine went out of business, and so they couldn't find me. So it took like a year where they finally went through their files and found a postcard I'd sent them. And so anyway, they just gave me a call and said, we'd like to give it a shot. And so the interesting thing about syndication is that it's like a dream for most people back, especially back then. Like I know it's
Hmm.
harder
Hmm.
now. I mean, the landscape has changed, but I would just lie in bed and just like just tell the universe, please let me get syndicated. There's no other way to get in papers. There's no other way to just like do what I want to do.
Hmm.
That very specific dream, and so when that happened, all of a sudden I realized that just because you get syndicated doesn't mean you're going to stay syndicated.
Right.
That's the hard thing. In the attrition rate for like the first year or two is like 80%. I mean,
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah, so that's really like, so you get syndicated and you're like, well, the first thing is like you think, oh, I'm not going to stay syndicated. This is going to be hard. The second thing is you realize that you've already used up all your best ideas for your submission. So you have like 6 weeks of like cartoons you think are pretty good, they got you syndicated, and then you wake up on week 7 and you're like, oh my God, I have nothing. Like I have I have nothing in the bank. I got to start. So for 29 and a half years, I've been sort of going by the seat of my pants every Monday morning and starting with a blank notebook and seeing what percolates.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask about that, generating ideas. So any special sauce or anything that helps you percolate?
Yeah, I mean, um, two things really. So, I mean, the main thing, this is what I often tell like high school kids or and younger is that you can't just like lock yourself away and draw. Like that whole cliche of like I'm in an attic, but hiding up in your attic and drawing and be the sort of the crazy crazy person just doing the cool drawings. That only lasts for a little while because if you want to be creative, you need input. It
Hmm.
can't all be output. And so for me, what's really helpful is I just read a lot, like not just like literature, but like I just read it like lots of different things because I really I need things to draw from.
Hmm.
And B, I really it's important to me with speed bump in particular that it stays somewhat relevant. Like not that I need to be like, ooh, what's a good TikTok joke? Like, because
Right.
I'm not on TikTok. So I'm like, I don't want to make it up and just, do a TikTok joke for the sake of a TikTok joke. Because I don't even understand TikTok. Like I'm just like, I'll embarrass myself. But I do want to stay topical, like not political, but topical. I sometimes I see some of these cartoons and it's like somebody selling vacuums at the door, like a traveling vacuum salesman. I'm like, no one does that anymore. Like,
Right.
don't do cartoons that are based on cartoons you've read. Do cartoons based on what people are talking about. What are people doing? What are people interested in? What's pissing everybody off? Or, so I do a lot. I'll do a lot of technology cartoons just because everybody is talking about it, and it opens up a wide range of possibilities when you do that kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that sort of thing is important. In the reading, but also sort of counterintuitively, a routine. I find a routine really important to me. I know there's whole books on this where it's actually very important to a lot of creative people. So it's not like you're wandering around the field and you're like walking your dog or you're buying some Cheerios or whatever, and it's like oh, I got a good idea about Cheerios. That doesn't just for me, and I think for most people, it doesn't really work that way.
Hmm.
You're sort of gathering information. You're aggregating life. And then when I come up in my studio, I sit in the same place. I got a notebook, I got my coffee. I pretty much the view is the same, and I'm like, okay, like what's going on, and
Yeah.
so then my brain starts, it knows it's time to work. Like,
Hmm.
okay, this is what we do when we sit here, and this is how it goes. And so then I don't try and think of jokes. Like I don't I'd be curious to talk to somebody about that if any people do that because I just think of subject matter.
Yeah.
Like I just go through and it's like, okay, guy's walking his dog. Um, there's a sign that says whatever, and then there's somebody walking like a giraffe. I don't know. I mean, that's a cartoon that will never happen because it's so stupid on this face. But yes, you start doing that. Like you start taking disparate things and you start writing them down, and then if when it works, 7 times a week, those two things will maybe overlap. There'll be a Venn diagram of like, oh, well, but what if? I mean, really, like most of my job is just me going, what if, what if, what if? And then the other 90% of my job is editing, like
Yeah.
self-editing. So you have all these things and you're like, is that any good? Is that any good? Like let it sit for a minute. Could that be better? And then once you've got something that you think is like you recognize as a decent joke that you could probably use, then the thing is you're winnowing it down. So
Mm.
the editing just becomes in like, okay, how can I get this down to the basic nugget of what's going on here? I mean, I think it was Mark Twain that said, um, there is there's a nugget of truth in every jest. And
Hmm.
it's like
Hmm.
that's what you're getting at because that's what people recognize when they see a joke that they like, they recognize something in it. They,
Hmm.
themselves or their neighbors or something that's happened to them, but it feels like, oh, the joke works because it feels real, but the situation is absurd.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
you got both worlds going on, and that little like that's where the idea is in that nexus. Um, but finding those little nexuses and nexi, that's I mean that's what ideas are, right? Is that's like finding
Hmm.
finding that moment. There's this great cartoon by Sidney Harris for the New Yorker. This is from like probably this, I don't know, 70s or 80s. And he's got two scientists standing at the giant chalkboard. And it's like all this data on one side, all this data on the other side. And then in the middle it just says, and then a miracle occurs. And that's the bridge between all this data. And you're like, I'm kind of like, that's kind of like cartoon ideas. Like you
Yeah.
got all these things you're thinking about, but there's a moment you can't explain where like your mind puts those puzzles together and it's like, oh, these two things make this third thing. Um, and that third thing actually works as its own thing. And it's pretty funny. And it's not necessarily that it's super funny. Like I don't on Wednesday night when I turn my 7 cartoons in, I don't think like, man, I killed all 7 of those. I mean,
Right.
you just don't do that. You're like you're hoping for a couple that you really are happy with, but you recognize that they work at
Mhm.
some level and that somebody will hopefully like them.
It's a fascinating process because there's so much that goes into it, and there's so much that's under the surface that you mentioned 6 seconds to kind of take it in. There's really a lot of ingredient there.
Right. I mean, and I think you nailed like the single panel idea right there because there's a lot to take in, and that's why you're the purveyor of relevant information. Like what information are you going to give people, and what information are you going to leave out?
Hmm.
Like that's the number one thing I see with younger cartoonists sometimes is like you try and draw the hell out of it. And you're like, oh yeah, like I mean, there's so many. I can't even tell you how many people are there in the world that can draw way better than me. But you have to know, like that doesn't matter sometimes. I mean, sometimes you can draw a stick figure, do a stick figure cartoon. In fact, I'll send you one of those too. And
Hmm.
it's that is funnier than if you'd done it in something else. I mean, it's all about the idea um, being represented the correct way with so that you're giving the information to the reader not only the right amount but in the right order.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
that's kind of where the art comes in too because you want them to read the word balloon first and then then see the shoe inside dog's mouth or whatever, or vice versa. So like you're creating this little tiny world over and over and over again. It's not the same world, so you're creating your world just for that joke. And so I mean, it's kind of like if you're looking at a movie reel
Hmm.
and the thing. And so in your mind, when you're doing an idea, you're not seeing like the joke. You're seeing here's the action. The
Hmm.
guy's walking his dog, and then he runs into somebody, and something happens. And so your job as a cartoonist is to like pick which cell, which moment is the best way to tell that joke. Because a lot
Hmm.
of the jokes are good because like something's about to happen, or sometimes they're good because something just happened. In fact, the worst ones are usually just showing what happened.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you want to have that pause where somebody's like, "Oh, that impending doom. Oh, I see." That.
Hmm.
So there is a lot of goes on as far as just knowing how to precisely tell that little skit you saw in your head. Um, and not I'm not always right about that. I go back a lot and see some of my older cartoons and think, oh, I there's a better way to tell that joke. But when you're doing 7 a week and you're like a one person factory, just like boom, 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 boom. So, and that's the thing you have to get used to too, is like you can't fuss over them.
Yeah.
You, you
Yeah.
just can't sit around and like dink around with a cartoon for that long. It's like you have to get it. That's part of being a professional is like you know what you need to do. You put it out, and then it's out. You can't fret. But
Yeah.
it's already you can be disappointed in yourself, but you can't fret about it anymore. It's just like it's gone because the next morning you got to do it again.
That's right. That's right. Um, well, I can't imagine that there's a lot of fretting that happens, but I also know the inner critic and the perfectionist and all of those things as well. Um, if I'm a listener out there and I want to find your work, where would be some places that I might look first?
The most direct place would just go to my website, which is speedbump.com. And from there you can go off and find other things. I think Go Comics slash Speed Bump has like the daily cartoon. And you can there's a business or an organization that called Daily Wisdom that where you can sign up. I think it's $2.99 a month, and you get a cartoon texted to you every day. Um,
Nice.
So, and that's also all those things are on my website, along with the children's books. And there's a 25th anniversary book that's also available. So sort of a collection of the ones that I've chosen that I probably would re-choose with 5 years of hindsight. But it turned out IDW did it, and I will, just as not as a plug for me, but as a plug for IDW. The book is gorgeous. They did a hardcover. It's a
Wow.
full color. I mean, really, they did a really nice job. So you'd get a bang for your buck, at least on quality paper, if nothing
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. Well, have we missed anything in the talk through
Um,
that you want to make sure to share before we close out?
um, no, I think I blabbed on quite a bit.
No, it's interesting. It's really interesting to hear the process, and we were talking before I hit record about just how magical and nuanced that process is. So very cool to hear what it's like, and glad to share about your work.
Well, I'm really happy to talk about it, and obviously, I talk about it all day. So I appreciate the invite, Jason.
Absolutely glad to have you back anytime.
Oh, great.